The frost had come early that year, brushing the prairie grass silver and stilling the wind into something sacred. The world felt hushed, as if it remembered a time before fences and gunfire, before men planted flags in soil that had never asked for ownership. On the edge of that quiet land, beneath the brittle limbs of a dying cottonwood, stood a woman alone. Martha Crowley wore solitude like a threadbare shawl, something meant to keep the cold off her bones, but too worn to truly help. Her eyes, once green and curious, now held the same stillness as the winter sky. She lived in a cabin built by hands that were no longer alive, her husband's grave marked by a crooked wooden cross just beyond the pasture fence. The townsfolk said she talked too little, smiled too little, and loved a child that wasn't hers a little too much. They had theories about her, how she'd brought bad luck, how her land would never bear fruit. But they rarely said such things to her face. In the mornings, she boiled coffee with her back to the door, the walls sighing in the cold. And when little Sarah padded out barefoot from the back room, hair tangled and brown as chestnuts, Martha would kneel down, wrap her in a quilt, and kiss the crown of her head. Sarah was 6, and her skin bore the soft bronze of the plains. Her mother, Martha's sister, had died birthing her in a wagon that had never reached Kansas. Her father, a Lakota brave, had vanished like snow under sun. Martha raised the child because no one else would. The preacher's wife had whispered once gently that perhaps it would be best if Sarah were taken east, to a place for children of her kind. Martha didn't reply. She simply took Sarah's hand and walked away. On that particular morning, the sky was pale and high, stretched thin like old parchment. Martha stood at the fence mending a break where coyotes had slipped through. The child played nearby with a carved horse made from scrap wood and nail heads, humming some made-up lullaby with no words, just sounds full of wind and echo. Martha listened without listening until she felt it. A presence, not a sound, not a shape, but a shift in the air, like a prayer being spoken behind her back. She turned slowly, eyes moving toward the woods lining the edge of the land. There was nothing, no wind, no bird, no beast. But her heart drummed. She felt watched, and not by a deer or curious coyote. Watched by something that understood silence better than she did. Far beyond the trees, hidden among the dark branches, a man stood stiller than stone. His name was Tatii Ska, though the settlers would never know it. To them, he was a shadow, a whisper of danger in a country that did not want to share. His bow was slung across his shoulder, the arrows tipped and fletched with hawk feathers. He had been told to kill. The council of elders had spoken of a betrayal. A settler woman had traded secrets with the bluecoats years ago, told them where the children and the old ones sheltered. The raid that followed left blood in the snow and a fire that wouldn't die out in memory. They had no name, only a direction, a farm, and a whisper of a white woman who raised a Lakota child. He had come to end her life, not out of hate, but duty. Balance must be kept, they had said. The dead cannot speak for themselves, so justice must wear another's hands. He saw her now, standing with her back to the woods, mending the fence with steady fingers. She worked like someone who didn't expect help. Her dress was patched, boots cracked. Her hair had streaks of silver, though she was not yet old. And when the child ran to her, laughing about something small, a bird, maybe, she knelt and listened as if it mattered more than anything in the world. Tatii watched and waited, but did not move. At sunset, the light bled red across the land. Martha lit a lantern and brought it inside, humming a tune with no words. Her hands moved by memory, setting bread to rise, sweeping the floor, tucking Sarah in with a story about stars and brave girls. She paused at the door, looking out once more into the woods. Something had changed, though she couldn't name it. The next morning, she found something resting on the porch rail. A single white feather, carved, not plucked, smoothed and etched with a careful hand. Lakota work, unmistakably. Not a threat, not a mark of death, but something else. She stared at it a long time, then picked it up and brought it inside. The days passed, but the feeling did not. That someone was watching, not in anger, but in sorrow. That someone was wrestling with their own ghosts just out of sight. And sometimes, at night, she thought she heard movement near the barn. Not footsteps, just the creak of old wood, like someone leaning against it, breathing softly. She never saw him, but she began to leave small things on the porch: dried apples, strips of jerky, a bundle of winter herbs. They were always gone by morning. One night, Sarah asked her, "Auntie, is there a ghost here?" Martha smiled gently. "Not a ghost, darling. Just someone remembering." Tati sat in the trees that night, holding one of the herbs between his fingers. He didn't understand why he hadn't drawn his bow. Why, when he saw her, the task he carried became too heavy to lift. But he remembered her face. Years ago, on the edge of another winter, he'd been just a boy, wounded, half dead from a bullet wound and hiding under brush. A woman with trembling hands and firelit eyes had found him and fed him broth. She sang softly in a language he didn't know. She was younger then. It had been her. He hadn't remembered until he saw her again. And now, how could he kill someone who once spared him? The forest held its breath. The land turned colder. And two souls, one watching and one waiting, began to drift toward each other, not through grand gestures or declarations, but in the quiet way rivers wear down stone. By week's end, Martha found firewood stacked neatly by the door. It hadn't been there the night before. Cut clean, dry, and placed with care. She said nothing, only touched the top log with her fingertips, then looked out toward the trees with something almost like warmth in her gaze. Almost. The wind had turned sharper, as if the land itself were warning of a cold to come. Mornings came rimmed with frost, each fence post silvered, the ground brittle beneath boots. Martha moved slower now, not from age, but from the weight of waiting. Waiting for a winter she'd survived before, waiting for eyes in the woods that no longer felt like a threat. The feathers still sat on her mantle, beside the Bible she hadn't opened in months. She hadn't told Sarah where it came from. The girl had noticed it, of course, and asked, but Martha had only said, "It's from someone who didn't forget us." And maybe that was the truth. She noticed other things, too. The tools she'd left rusting behind the barn, cleaned. The bucket she'd dropped by the well, placed upright the next morning. One night she awoke to the faint scent of smoked meat drifting under the door, and found a small bundle of dried venison hanging on a nail come morning. It was the kind of help no neighbor would offer. Not for her. The town had made its mind up about Martha Crowley. They said she lived too close to Indian land, that she raised a half-breed child out of stubbornness, not kindness, that she smiled at silence and never joined Sunday hymns. She didn't belong, and she'd long stopped trying to. But whoever moved through her woods left no footprints, no name, no debt, just quiet offerings and a sense of being seen. Then came the day Sarah wandered too close to the trees. Martha was kneeling in the field, digging up what carrots she could find in the hardening soil. She looked up to call the girl back, only to find her standing at the edge of the woods, staring upward. The wind paused. When Martha reached her, Sarah turned and whispered, "There was a man." Her heart lurched. What kind of man? The child tilted her head thoughtfully. Not bad. Just quiet. Like the trees. Martha knelt. Did he say anything? Sarah shook her head. He looked at me. I looked at him. Then he was gone. That night, Martha left no herbs, no food. She left herself. Wrapped in a shawl and lantern light, she stepped off her porch and into the trees, boots muffled by pine needles. She did not call out. She simply walked, as if the land would bring him to her if it chose to. She found him sitting on a fallen log near the creek, fireless, bow across his knees. He did not move when she came into view. She stood 5 steps away, her breath a cloud. The silence between them was thick, but not heavy. It felt like the kind of silence two people shared when they had nothing to prove. "You were sent to kill me," she said, softly, not as an accusation. He lifted his eyes, dark, sharp, but not cruel. "Yes, but you didn't. I remembered your voice," he said. "Years ago. I bled into the dirt. You gave me water. You didn't run." She stepped closer, studying him in the faint glow of her lantern. He was older now, of course, broad-shouldered, solemn. But the lines around his mouth weren't angry, just tired. She remembered a boy with blood on his chest and defiance in his eyes. "They told you I betrayed you." He nodded once. "And yet you watched. You helped." "I watched because I had to. I helped because I wanted to." The lantern swung between them. She could see the feather hanging from his braid, white, carved, a twin to the one he'd left her. Her fingers curled around its memory. "Why do they think I betrayed anyone?" she asked. He looked past her toward the prairie. "After the Treaty of 3 Hills. A soldier said a woman told him where our winter camp was. Said she wore a scarf like yours. Wore a cross. Told him the old and the sick had gone north. They came and killed everyone there." Martha's voice was hollow. "It wasn't me." "I know," he said. She stepped forward and sat on the log beside him. "You were the boy," she murmured. "Shot in the ribs. You crawled to the edge of our garden." "My brother died that night," he said. "He was younger. They shot him through the heart. I heard him die." Her hand reached out, not to comfort, but to anchor. It landed lightly on the wood between them. He did not flinch. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," he answered. They sat in silence again. But it wasn't emptiness. It was a stitching of something broken, something almost whole. She rose after a while. "You don't have to hide." He shook his head. "I'm not ready to be seen." "But you don't have to run either." He didn't reply, but his eyes held hers long enough for her to understand. She left the lantern by his feet and walked back through the trees, never once looking over her shoulder. From that night on, a rhythm began. He would leave meat. She would leave cloth, mended gloves, a scarf. He would clear dead brush. She would leave tea leaves in a pouch sewn with her initials. They spoke only when paths crossed. Once, he asked her what the child liked to eat. She told him Sarah adored dried cherries. A week later, a small bundle appeared on the porch. They never discussed love. They never even touched. But something gentler than either of them had known in years passed between them like breath in cold air, visible for a moment, then gone, but always there. One evening, she sat with Sarah before the fire. The child was drawing a buffalo with chalk on pine bark, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. Martha braided her hair slowly, watching the flames dance. "Do you think he's lonely?" Sarah asked. "Who?" "The man in the woods." Martha smiled. "Maybe. Maybe not." "I think he's kind," Sarah said. "I think he's brave," Martha replied. Sarah turned to look at her. "Will he ever come to supper?" Martha didn't answer. The wind rattled the window pane, but inside, the warmth held. That night, Martha stepped onto the porch and found a length of red cloth wrapped around a deerskin pouch. Inside were beads, small, simple, carved from bone and dyed with earth. She held them in her palm for a long time, then lifted her eyes to the stars. "I see you," she whispered into the dark. And from the woods, though no sound replied, she knew someone had heard. In the town, whispers had begun again. Someone had seen footprints near her barn. Others claimed to hear singing from the trees. Ghost songs, they called them. Some warned of spirits. Others muttered of warriors lurking too close. But Martha didn't flinch. She no longer believed in ghosts, only in the man who didn't kill her. The snow came not with fury, but with a hush, blanketing the land in soft silence, as though it meant to preserve the world as it was, a secret folded in white. It muffled the sound of horse hooves, of doors creaking, of sorrow even. The drifts grew high around Martha's porch, and her lantern light painted gold arcs across the snow each evening as she stepped out to listen, to watch. Sarah had taken to standing by the window longer now, looking not toward town, but the tree line, where she sometimes swore she saw a man. Not a monster, not a ghost, just a man with a long shadow. "I saw him again," she whispered one morning, still wrapped in her quilt. Martha nodded, without looking up from her stitching. "What did he do?" "Nothing. Just stood there, like he was thinking about something big." Martha's needle paused. Maybe he was. Outside, the wind carved low across the prairie, smoothing the snow like a sculptor. The world seemed suspended, caught in a moment between breath and exhale. It had been weeks since that night by the creek, yet Martha could still recall the feel of the log beneath her, the silence between them, the soft timbre of his voice, when he spoke truths no one else dared carry. His name still hadn't passed her lips. Not aloud. Not to Sarah. Some names were not meant to be claimed too soon. The town, meanwhile, had grown restless. Winter always made men paranoid. With the cold came fewer distractions, more time for watching, whispering. Mrs. Farrow from the chapel brought soup one day, but the gesture came with questions cloaked in sugar. "Is it true you've seen someone lurking near your place?" Martha answered gently, "I see deer. I see foxes." Mrs. Farrow smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Some folks say it's not animals you've been feeding. I suppose some folks like stories better than silence." That ended the visit. Later that week, the preacher gave a sermon on vigilance, on wolves in sheep's clothing, on women who consorted with danger out of loneliness, then brought ruin to their doorsteps. He never said her name. He didn't need to. Martha walked home slowly that day, boots crunching in old snow, heart heavy with the ache of being misunderstood. At the gate, she found a small figure waiting. Tati stood beside the fence post, arms crossed, one braid tossed over his shoulder. He said nothing, but he looked at her as if he could feel the sermon's sting without hearing it. She looked back, eyes softer than usual, something tired behind them. "You shouldn't come so close," she murmured. "I was already here." She opened the gate and stepped inside. They stood face to face in the yard, frost swirling between them. "There's talk now," she said. "Rumors. They think I've been consorting." "And have you?" he asked, a trace of dry humor touching his voice. "I wouldn't know what that word even means anymore." He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat and handed her a pouch. Inside were dried cherries. Martha blinked, something catching behind her ribs. "Sarah will be pleased." "You?" he asked. She held the pouch tight, warming it in her palms. "Me too." He turned as if to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why did you come today?" He paused, snow stirring at his feet. "Because the land is louder than your town's whispers." She stepped forward, slowly. "And what is the land saying?" "That they're coming closer." She understood. Not wolves. Not storms. Townsfolk. Fear dressed as justice. She took a breath. "Then I'll need to start preparing." "For what?" "For losing what I haven't yet had." He looked at her then, fully, as though trying to decide something that had no words. "Come with me," he said finally. "If they come for you, you'll be safer under trees than walls." "I can't run." "Not with Sarah. Not from this place." "Then I'll stay closer." She met his gaze, and the weight of that promise hung between them. Not romantic, not yet, but real. Weighty. Like roots under frost. That night, she told Sarah a story she'd once heard from a Lakota elder long ago. A tale of a hawk who fell in love with a rabbit. Not in the way of fairy tales, but in the way of watching, waiting, admiring from afar. The hawk gave up flying, grounded itself, grew quiet. "Why would he do that?" Sarah asked. "Because sometimes," Martha said softly, "we find peace where we're not supposed to, and it changes everything." Sarah nodded sleepily. "I think the hawk was just lonely." Martha kissed her forehead. Maybe the rabbit was too. Outside, snow began to fall again. A few nights later, the wind shifted, southbound, bitter. Tati found her by the barn, tending a goat that had gone lame. She didn't ask how he knew to come. They moved together without speaking, binding the leg, feeding the animal. When the work was done, she leaned against the post, eyes closed. "Do you ever wish things had turned out different?" she asked. "I used to," he said, "before I saw you again." She opened her eyes, surprised. He didn't look at her. "You remind me that mercy isn't weakness." Her voice trembled. "And you remind me I'm not invisible." They didn't touch. Not yet. But she leaned slightly toward him, and he didn't move away. The wind carried their breath into the cold, white air. Then the sound came, distant but distinct. Hoofbeats. Martha stiffened. "Visitors?" he asked. "Not the friendly kind." Together, they moved toward the front path, hidden behind the barn. 3 men on horseback rode past the fence, scanning the land like hunters. One of them was Granger, a man who once fancied himself owed Martha's hand and held the grudge like a match against his palm. He stopped by the gate, stared toward the house, and spit into the snow. "Seen footprints here," he called to no one. "Same boots. Same trail. Maybe we'll find a nest soon enough." They didn't enter. Not that night. But the message had been left behind. When the men were gone, Tati looked at Martha, his jaw tight. "They're testing you." She nodded, eyes dry. "I've been tested before." He turned toward the woods. "Where are you going?" "To bring back something that might scare them more than I do." "Will it work?" He looked back. "Only if you don't give up. I'm not built for surrender." His lips lifted, not quite a smile, but something close. Then he vanished into the trees once more. Martha stood alone in the snow, hand resting on the fence post where he'd first stood weeks ago. The sky had darkened. But beneath the snow, beneath the cold, something deep and warm stirred, like spring waiting beneath the ice. She whispered into the wind, not knowing if he'd hear. "Come back soon." The sheriff came just after sunrise, the kind of hour when even the birds stayed quiet. His boots left deep impressions in the snow, each step measured like a man walking into a sermon he didn't want to preach. Behind him rode 2 deputies, young, jumpy boys with eyes too eager to prove something. Their horses snorted and pawed at the cold ground like they sensed the weight in the air. Martha met them at the edge of her porch, apron stiff with frost, hands raw from the morning's water haul. She didn't invite them inside. They didn't expect her to. The sheriff tipped his hat, but it held no warmth. "Mornin', Miss Crowley." She nodded. "Sheriff." He cleared his throat, looking out across her field, as though he didn't quite want to look at her. "Got a few concerns been brought to my office. About visitors on your property. Tracks odd signs. Someone said they saw a man slipping into your barn after dark." "Someone says a lot these days," she said, voice even. "We ain't here to stir trouble," he lied, watching her too carefully. "Just need to know if you've been harboring anyone." Martha held his gaze. "If I had, would the law consider it a crime to offer food to someone cold? If that someone's who folks say he is, it ain't just food we're talking about. It's aiding a threat." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't blink. "You ever ask why someone would be out here alone in the cold to begin with?" "Don't matter why," he said. "What matters is what folks fear. And right now they're scared. Of me. Of what you represent." A silence fell. Not empty, just full of things no one dared say aloud. The weight of history. Of blood and land and names erased by wind. "I raise a child no one else would take," Martha said finally. "I feed what mouths I can. I sleep with both eyes open. If that makes me dangerous, maybe danger's not what you think it is." The sheriff shifted. "Watch yourself, Martha. I ain't your enemy, but I won't be able to stop what's coming if the town decides it don't like what it sees." He turned without another word. The boys followed. Snow swallowed their tracks slowly, as if the land was ashamed of them. Inside, Sarah sat at the table, coloring a scrap of paper with charcoal. She didn't look up when Martha entered. "Were they here about him?" she asked. Martha didn't answer right away. She took off her apron, hung it on the hook, and knelt beside her. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people hate what they don't try to understand." Sarah drew a heart in the corner of the page. "But he's kind." "I know." A few days passed in brutal silence. The cold deepened. The sky took on a bruised look, like it, too, had been struck by something it couldn't name. Then came Granger. He rode up at dusk with 3 others, men who drank hard and believed louder. They didn't bother with the gate. Their horses crushed the fence like it was paper. Martha stood on the porch again, shotgun in hand, but barrel down. She didn't want blood. She wanted to be left alone. Granger dismounted, boots crunching loud in the snow. "You always had a taste for the strange," he said, smiling without humor. "Told the boys back in town you weren't just feeding him. Said maybe you let him warm your bed, too." Martha's grip on the shotgun tightened. "I told them they were wrong," he added. "Told them you didn't have enough fire left in you for that. Just pity, maybe." She said nothing, but they didn't like hearing that. Pity's still treason when it's pointed the wrong way. Behind him, one of the men struck a match and held it to a scrap of burlap soaked in oil. It caught fast. "Thought we'd light a little warning," Granger said. "Nothing serious." just to let the savages know their whores ain't welcome here. That's when the arrow hit the snow between Granger's boots. He froze. From the tree line, Tati stepped forward. No war paint. No fury. Just a bow in hand, another arrow knocked, and eyes full of the kind of stillness that made men remember death. "You'll drop that fire," he said, voice low but unshaking, "or I'll plant the next one in your throat." Granger hesitated, the flame flickering in his companion's hand. The silence stretched thin. Martha spoke then, voice calm. "You were a boy once, Granger. Your mother taught you better." He turned to her, snarling. "You don't get to. She fed my sister when we had nothing, brought cornbread to our porch in the war winter. You think she'd be proud of you now?" His face twisted, but the man beside him dropped the burlap into the snow, stomping it out. Granger stepped back. "You're choosing a side, Martha." "I already did." The men left without another word. Tati didn't lower his bow until their silhouettes faded into the trees. Martha looked at him. "You risked everything." "I already did," he said, echoing her words. That night, she made stew and left the door unlatched. He entered after Sarah had gone to sleep, sat across from her, their hands never touching the table surface, but close enough to share warmth. They ate in silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked finally. "Yes," she said. No hesitation, but not as a ghost. He met her eyes, and the faintest breath of a smile touched his lips. "I'm tired of hiding," he admitted. "Then don't," she whispered. "Let the world do the hiding for once." The candle between them flickered, casting shadows on the walls, shadows that no longer looked like warnings, but like shapes of something beginning. Outside, the cold howled, but inside, the fire held strong. She stood to clear the bowls and paused at the window, watching snow fall like ash, soft and endless. "They'll come again," she said, "with more fire, more lies." "Yes. But this time," she said, "I won't be on the porch waiting." He stood beside her, shoulder brushing hers, steady as earth. Neither spoke again. But in the quiet, something ancient settled, a promise older than words. Dawn came red and sharp as a blade. The wind had gone quiet, but not out of peace. Something else held its breath. Smoke rose from chimneys in town, but none from Martha's hearth. She hadn't slept. Neither had Tati. They sat across from each other, coffee gone cold between them, every sound in the house exaggerated by the silence. Sarah still slept, unaware. He had heard the whisperings the night before, passed through the woods like a warning. Granger was coming again, this time not with matches and men looking for a thrill, but with torches and resolve. The kind of cruelty that called itself justice. "How many?" Martha asked. "6. Maybe more." She nodded once and stood. Her hand trembled just slightly as she reached for her coat. "You don't have to be here," she said. "You did enough already." Tati rose slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I told you once I was meant to kill you," he said. "But maybe I was meant to do something harder. Stay." She exhaled long and low. "If it comes to fire, I'm not running." "If it comes to fire," he said, "we meet it together." Outside, the land was still. Snow crunched beneath their boots, the last remnants of winter holding fast to the edges of the earth. But there was a scent in the air, wet soil, faint blossoms, the first hints of spring. They moved quickly, preparing what little they could. Water in buckets, blankets wet and hung over the porch rail. The livestock set free, just in case. Sarah was dressed and sent to the root cellar with a promise and a kiss. "I'll knock 3 times when it's safe," Martha whispered. "Don't come out till then." The girl's eyes were wide, but dry. "Tell him not to die." Martha smiled, fragile as a frostbitten petal. "I already have." Then the hoofbeats came. The sound of it, the rhythm, was different this time. It was not a warning. It was a sentence being carried toward them. Granger rode at the head, wrapped in a fur coat like a general. His face was flushed with the righteousness of cowards, the kind who believed the mob behind them made them holy. There were 8 others now, faces hard, rifles ready. "This is your last warning, Crowley," he called as they reached the fence. "You give up the savage now, and we'll walk away." Martha stepped forward, rifle in hand, but not raised. "There's no savage here," she said. "Only a man braver than any of you." "Don't test us," another shouted. "We've got law behind us." Tati stepped beside her. "You have fire," he said. "That's not the same." Granger spat into the snow. "So be it." The first shot didn't come from them. It came from the trees. A warning crack, close enough to split the fence post beside Granger's boot. He flinched, then looked to the hills, where figures now emerged. 3 Lakota warriors on horseback, bows drawn, faces painted not for war, but for honor. Tati had called them. He hadn't planned to fight alone. Granger's men wavered, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. Suddenly, the snow wasn't just snow. It was a field of unknowns. White, yes, but no longer pure. They had come expecting weakness, expecting a woman and a man and a child to cower beneath them. What they found was something else. Granger raised his rifle anyway. Tati moved first. Not like thunder, but like wind, quiet and exact. He tackled Granger from the saddle before the man could even fire. They rolled in the snow, fists in fury, until the rifle slipped from Granger's grip. Martha raised her gun toward the others, steady now. The barrel aimed not at a heart, but at the idea that any of this was righteous. The men hesitated. One turned his horse, then another. Only 2 remained when Granger's shout rang out, sharp with rage. "You think this means anything? She's not one of you. You think she'll be yours in the end." Martha stepped closer, voice cold as the wind. "I'm not a prize. I'm not a weakness. And I'm not afraid of you." Granger reached for a hidden pistol at his belt. His hand never made it. Tati struck first. The blow was clean, across the jaw, dropping him into the snow like a broken oath. And then it was done. The other men fled. The warriors in the trees melted back into the woods. No celebration, no cheers. Just silence. A kind of peace that only comes after choosing not to destroy. Martha lowered her rifle and walked to where Granger lay groaning. She knelt beside him, not out of pity, but clarity. "This land isn't yours," she said. "And I never was." By noon, the snow had begun to melt in earnest. Sarah climbed out of the cellar, blinking against the light. Tati was sitting on the porch steps, bruised but calm. Martha had brewed coffee. It tasted bitter, but it was warm. They didn't talk much that day. The house smelled like pine and smoke, but not a fear. Sarah sat beside him, offering him a drawing of a hawk and a rabbit. He looked at it a long time before nodding once, deeply. Later, when the sun began to dip, Martha stood beside him, watching the light turn everything gold. "You stayed," she said softly. "I didn't know how to leave." She brushed a leaf from his shoulder, her fingers grazing his collarbone. He didn't move. "I reckon I'll ask you now," she said, barely louder than a breath. He turned toward her, a slow smile finding its way through all the silence. "I've been waiting," he replied. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Some love doesn't need the punctuation of lips, just the promise of breath, shared in the open. In the distance, the prairie bloomed, just barely. Crocuses pushing through thawed soil, birds returning, the land stretching after sleep. And in that gentle unfolding, a new beginning took root, not forged by conquest or fear, but by something older. Mercy. The kind that wears skin and carries scars. The kind that looks like a man who lowered his bow, and a woman who opened her door.